I am Aurelia Voss. I am 36 years old, and I own 8 rental properties across 3 cities in Ohio. I built every single one of them without a dollar from my family. But at Christmas dinner last year in front of 20 relatives, my brother stood up and told the room that I owed everything I had to our family. He was wrong, and my grandmother had the documents to prove exactly how wrong he was. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your city or your state in the comments below. And if you have ever worked for something while watching someone else get handed the same thing for free, hit that like button right now because this story is for you. Subscribe if you are new here, because what I am about to share is something I kept quiet for 15 years, and I am only saying it once. That Christmas dinner did not start as a confrontation. It started as just another holiday I almost did not attend. But my grandmother Constance was turning 75 that year, and she had asked me specifically to be there. So I went. I brought an apple pie I made from scratch. I sat at the far end of the table, and I planned to leave by 8. I did not leave by 8. What happened instead started with my 19-year-old cousin Petra pulling up a YouTube channel on her phone, and ended with my grandmother standing up, walking into the back room, and returning with a manila folder that made my father go pale. Stay with me, because this story does not start at that dinner table. It starts about 30 years earlier in a house in Columbus, Ohio, where I learned very early that 2 children in the same family can grow up in completely different worlds. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My father Raymond worked as an accountant. My mother Linda worked at an insurance office. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. There was always food, always heat in the winter, always working vehicles in the driveway. From the outside, we looked like a normal, stable family. I was the firstborn. When I was 6 years old, my brother Thaddeus arrived. I remember the night he came home from the hospital. My grandmother Constance sat beside me on the couch, held my hand and said, "You are going to have to be the strong one, Aurelia." I nodded. I thought she was complimenting me. It took me many years to understand she was actually describing a pattern that was already in motion. The changes did not happen overnight. They came in small pieces, spaced out enough that each one alone seemed minor. Together they added up to something impossible to ignore. When I was 8 years old, I asked my mother if I could take piano lessons. I had heard a girl in my class play at a school event and I wanted to learn. My mother said we did not have the money right then. 3 months later, my father signed Thaddeus up for an advanced swim program. The monthly cost was more than double what the piano lessons would have been. I did not say anything. I was 8. I did not have the words yet. When I was 10, my school organized a field trip to a science museum in Chicago. The cost was $200. I brought the permission slip home and left it on the kitchen counter. Nobody signed it. Nobody mentioned it. The morning of the trip, I sat in a classroom with 3 other kids whose families also had not sent them. That same week, my father brought home a premium Lego set for Thaddeus. $160. When I was 12, I scored the highest grade in the district on a regional math exam. My teacher sent a congratulatory letter home. My father read it, nodded once, and set it on the counter next to the keys. That evening, my parents took Thaddeus out to dinner to celebrate the fact that he had learned to ride his bike without training wheels. I stayed home and made myself a sandwich. When I was 13, my winter coat zipper broke in the middle of January. I asked my mother for a new coat. She told me to wear an extra layer underneath. 2 weeks later, Thaddeus had a brand new Patagonia jacket, $130. The tag was still on it when he wore it to school. None of these moments caused a scene. Nobody yelled. Nobody sat down and explained their thinking. It was quieter than that, and because it was quiet, it was easier for everyone around me to pretend it was not happening. My mother's sister, my Aunt Diane, visited the house several times a year. One afternoon when I was around 11, I heard her say to my mother in the kitchen, "Linda, do you ever notice that Aurelia gets a lot less than Thaddeus?" My mother laughed lightly and said, "She is just more independent than he is. She does not need as much." Diane did not push back. She dropped it. And that single word, independent, became the explanation my parents used to cover every gap, every absence, everything they chose not to give me. By the time I was 14, I had stopped asking for things. I set my own alarm. I cooked for myself on the nights my parents came home late. I asked teachers for free tutoring after school because I had figured out that doing well academically was the only thing fully within my own control. I was not doing any of this because I was mature beyond my years or because I had some special strength. I did it because nobody else was going to do it, and I knew that. Then, the summer before 11th grade, I heard something that changed the direction of my life. The summer I was 15, I spent a week at my grandmother Constance's house. She lived about 40 minutes outside Columbus, in a quiet neighborhood where she had been for 30 years. I liked being there. She treated me like someone whose presence mattered. One morning I was helping her reorganize a closet when she pulled out a box of financial documents. She was not being careless with them, she just needed help sorting. And while I was straightening a stack of folders, I saw two labeled documents sitting side by side. One read, Education Trust Fund Aureliami Voss. The other read, Education Trust Fund Thaddeus Ryan Voss. Both showed the same amount, $78,000. Both listed the same creator, Constance Elena Voss. I stood there holding those two folders and did not say a word. My grandmother noticed me go still. She sat down at the kitchen table and told me to sit across from her. Then she explained everything. She had opened both funds when Thaddeus and I were born, contributing monthly over many years. $78,000 each. She had handed management of the accounts over to my father because she trusted him. The funds were intended exclusively for college tuition and related educational costs. I asked her why my parents had never mentioned any of this to me. She said she did not know, and I could tell by the way she said it that she was concerned. When I got home, I waited for the right moment and then I asked my father directly. I kept my voice calm. I said I had seen the fund documents at grandmother's house and I wanted to know more about mine. He picked up his coffee cup, looked at me for a moment and said, "That is between your grandmother and us. You should not have been going through private papers. Let your mother and me handle things." Then he left the room. I tried once more about 6 months later, asking my mother on a Saturday afternoon while she was cooking. She did not even turn around from the stove. She said, "Everything is fine, Aurelia. Stop worrying about things that are not your business." I stopped asking out loud, but I did not stop paying attention. When Thaddeus turned 18, he applied to Ohio State University. His tuition was paid in full. His dormitory costs were covered every semester. He received a monthly allowance for living expenses. I heard my parents talk about it openly at the dinner table, pleased with how smoothly everything had been arranged. By that point I was 24 and had graduated from high school but could not afford to go to a 4-year university. I had asked about my fund 2 more times in those years. The first time my father said it had not been needed yet. The second time my mother told me they were handling some paperwork. Neither answer was an answer. I was working at a grocery store and a restaurant, 6 days a week, double shifts most days, paying my own rent on a room I was subletting from a coworker. I was taking 2 classes per semester at Columbus State Community College and paying out of pocket. The last time I asked about the fund, I was 25. My father looked me in the eye and said, "That money was used for family expenses, Aurelia. You should be grateful you had a roof over your head growing up." I walked to my room. I sat down on the floor with my back against the bed, and I made a decision that night that I have not regretted once since. I was done waiting, I was done asking. I was going to build something entirely on my own. The decision I made that night was not dramatic. It was practical. I wrote down what I had: $22 in checking, a part-time wage, a shared room, and a community college enrollment. I wrote down what I wanted: to never be financially dependent on anyone who had already shown me they would not protect my interests. Then I got to work. I picked up every available shift at both jobs: mornings at the grocery store, evenings at the restaurant. On days off I drove for a local delivery service. I brought my own food to work. I stopped spending on anything that was not rent, transportation, or tuition. In my second year at Columbus State, I took a personal finance course taught by a professor named Whitfield. He said one thing during that semester that I wrote down in my notebook and read back to myself regularly for years afterward. He said real estate is the only asset class where you can borrow other people's money to purchase a property, then use that same property to generate income that pays back the loan. I did not fully understand it yet, but I understood enough to know I needed to learn more. I started going to the public library after my evening shifts. I worked through every book on rental property investing they had on the shelf. I watched free tutorial videos online about Federal Housing Administration loans, about analyzing cash flow, about what makes a rental property worth pursuing. I took notes in a spiral notebook I carried everywhere. Nobody taught me any of this. No mentor appeared. I just kept reading and kept asking questions of the material itself. By the time I was 28, I had saved $22,000. It had taken 3 years of almost no personal spending. I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I found a duplex in Columbus listed at $315,000. With a Federal Housing Administration loan, my required down payment was 3%, which came to $9,450. I used that amount plus closing costs and kept the remainder as an emergency reserve. I moved into one unit and rented the other for $700 per month. That rent covered nearly all of my monthly mortgage payment. I was 28 years old, living in a property I owned, paying almost nothing out of pocket to stay there. Over the next 7 years, I reinvested every dollar of cash flow. I used equity from the Columbus duplex to fund down payments on additional properties. Each acquisition followed the same process: research the market, run the numbers, verify the rental demand, close carefully. I added properties in Dayton and Cincinnati. No partners, no loans from family, no help from anyone who had known me before I had anything. During this period, a co-worker from the restaurant days named Britta had stayed in my life as a genuine friend. She was the one who suggested I document what I was doing on video. She said she watched channels about personal finance and real estate and thought I had something real to say. I started recording on my phone, no script, no production setup. I just talked about what I was doing, what I had learned, where I had made mistakes, and how I corrected them. I called the channel Aurelia Builds. Within 2 years, the channel had 300,000 subscribers. Companies in insurance, personal finance software, and property management reached out for sponsorships. The additional income was substantial. I kept it separate from my rental income and invested it the same way I had invested everything else. I did not tell my family any of this, not because I was hiding it, because I had learned years earlier that sharing anything about my life with my parents or my brother created an opportunity for them to weigh in on something they had no stake in. I had built a boundary not by announcing it, but by simply not opening that door. I still showed up to family events once or twice a year because of my grandmother. Constance was the only person in that family I genuinely wanted to see. I came to Christmas dinner, sat at the far end of the table, stayed a couple of hours, and went home. By the end of that year, I was 35 years old. I owned 7 rental properties. I had a growing YouTube channel. My monthly passive income after expenses was steady and increasing. I had purchased my 8th property a few months later using a combination of saved cash flow and the equity I had built. And I had never received a single dollar of help from my family. I want to make sure that is completely clear before I tell you what happened at Christmas dinner, because what my brother said that night only makes sense when you understand the full weight of everything I just described. The dinner started the way it always did. About 20 relatives packed into my parents' house in Columbus: aunts, uncles, cousins. A couple of neighbors who had been coming for years. My grandmother Constance was the reason I came every year. She had turned 75 that season and she asked me to be there. When I walked in, she hugged me at the door and said quietly, "I am glad you are here." I set the apple pie I had baked on the counter and found a seat at the far end of the table. My cousin Petra was 19, home from her first year of college, and she was on her phone between courses the way people her age tend to be. She was browsing something related to a class project on real estate investing. I do not know the exact search she ran, but at some point she stopped scrolling, looked at me and grabbed my arm. "Aurelia, is this you?" She turned the screen toward me. It was my YouTube channel. The thumbnail of my face was on the screen, along with the subscriber count and the title of my most recent video. Petra was not trying to start anything. She was excited. She said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "You have a real estate channel. You have like almost 500,000 subscribers. You own properties. How did I not know this?" Thaddeus was sitting 2 seats away. He reached over and took the phone before I could respond. He scrolled through it for less than 30 seconds. Then he set the phone down on the table and looked at my parents. "Did you know about this?" My mother shook her head slightly. My father looked at the table. Thaddeus turned to face me directly. His voice was loud enough for the whole room. "You are out here acting like you built some empire on your own. But let's be honest. If our family had not given you a foundation, you would not have any of this. You do not get to walk around like some self-made person when this family is the reason you had anything to start with." Several relatives nearby nodded. One uncle said, "She could at least acknowledge what the family did for her." A couple of people murmured agreement. My mother looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one she used when she wanted me to smooth something over and not make a scene. I put my fork down. I looked at Thaddeus and said, "What exactly do you think this family gave me?" He leaned back confident. "A home, stability, support, everything you needed growing up." I said, "While you were in a fully paid dormitory at Ohio State with your tuition covered and a monthly allowance sent to your account, I was working 2 jobs to pay for community college out of my own wages. Do you know that?" The table got quieter. Thaddeus said, "That was your choice. Nobody stopped you from going to a real university." I said, "My fund would have covered it, except it was gone before I ever had the chance to use it." That was the first time I had said it out loud in a room with other people present. My mother started to speak. My grandmother stood up. Constance did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply pushed her chair back, walked down the hall to the guest room where she always kept a bag when she stayed over, and came back carrying a manila envelope. She set it on the table in front of my father and opened it herself. She laid out the first document. It was a copy of the original account statement for my education trust fund. $78,000, established the year I was born, contributed to monthly by Constance until both funds reached their full amount. "I created this fund for Aurelia," she said. "I also created one for Thaddeus, the same amount for each child. I gave Raymond authority to manage both accounts because I believed he would act as a trustee should." She laid out the second document. It was a transaction history. The room was completely silent. The withdrawals had started 5 years after the fund was established. The first was $3,000, recorded with a note that said home repair. The second was $22,000 with no note at all. The third was $15,000 labeled family investment. Then there were several smaller withdrawals over the following years. And then, the year Thaddeus graduated high school, a withdrawal of $18,000 in a single transaction. That was the same year my parents organized an international graduation trip to Europe for Thaddeus and paid the full deposit on an off-campus apartment where he lived for all 4 years of college. Every dollar of my $78,000 fund had been spent, not on my education, not on anything connected to me. My father stood up and said, "Mother, this is a private matter." My grandmother said, "Raymond, sit down. You used your daughter's education fund without her knowledge and without my authorization. You did not have the legal right to do that. I set up those accounts with specific terms, and what you did violated those terms. Every person in this room is going to know what happened tonight." Thaddeus had gone completely still. He said in a much smaller voice than he had been using all evening, "I did not know about any of this." My grandmother looked at him and said, "I believe you, but you need to understand that a significant portion of what you received came from money that was set aside for your sister." My Aunt Diane, who had been sitting rigid in her chair since the documents came out, said nothing, but her face said enough. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I waited until the room settled into its silence, and then I said, "I worked 2 jobs every day for over a decade. I taught myself everything I know. I bought my first property without help from a single person in this family. I built every one of those 8 properties the same way. And I did all of it not knowing that there was $78,000 with my name on it that disappeared before I ever saw a cent of it." I looked at my brother. "So no, I did not succeed because of this family. I succeeded in spite of what this family did." Nobody at that table said another word for a long time. In the weeks after that Christmas dinner, my grandmother retained her attorney. The transaction records she had preserved over the years documented every withdrawal from my trust fund clearly enough that the picture was not ambiguous. My father had removed funds from a trust account. He did not have unilateral authority to liquidate. The terms my grandmother had set when establishing both accounts required her written approval for any withdrawal above $500. No such approval had ever been given. After several months of legal correspondence between attorneys, my parents agreed to a partial repayment of $19,000, which represented what remained after accounting for funds they could no longer recover. It was not $78,000. It was not close, but I accepted it, and I signed the agreement, and I closed that chapter. I used that $19,000 as the down payment contribution on a property in Dayton. It became the 9th property in my portfolio. I chose that particular use deliberately. That money had been intended for my education, for my future. I put it toward exactly that. Thaddeus graduated from Ohio State about 6 months after that dinner. He applied for positions at several companies and did not receive offers at the level he expected. Without work experience outside of a few campus internships, without the habit of managing his own finances, and without anyone to absorb the consequences of his learning curve, the transition was harder than he had anticipated. He eventually accepted a retail management trainee position. He called me once about 4 months after Christmas. He said he wanted advice about building savings and starting to look at investments. I told him I was happy to recommend a few financial advisors I had encountered through my channel who worked with people early in their careers. I gave him 3 names. He thanked me and we ended the call. I did not reach out after that and neither did he. I was not cold toward him. I was not warm either. I was neutral in the way you can only be with someone once you have fully let go of expecting anything from them. With my parents it was different. There was more to sit with. These were not people who had been absent or indifferent toward me because they were struggling or overwhelmed. They had made a series of deliberate choices over many years, choices that required them to look at me and decide, repeatedly, that I did not need what they were giving to my brother. And then when the money they had taken became inconvenient, they called it a family expense and expected gratitude. I did not cut contact entirely. I sent a short message on their birthdays and on major holidays. When my mother had a minor health issue the following spring, I checked in by text and made sure she was being seen by her doctor. I was not cruel, but I did not return to Sunday dinners. I did not answer calls that came without warning. I was not punishing them. I was protecting myself by being honest about what those relationships actually were and adjusting my behavior accordingly. My grandmother and I grew closer. I visited her once a month, always on a Saturday, and we sat in her kitchen and talked for 2 or 3 hours at a time. She did not spend those visits apologizing repeatedly. She said what she had to say once clearly. She had trusted the wrong person with something important, and she was sorry for the role that trust had played in what I went through. I told her that the most important thing she had done was keep those records all those years, and then use them when it mattered. She said she had kept them because she always had a feeling she might need them one day. I did not ask her to say more about that. Britta stayed close through all of it. She was the person I called the week after Christmas when I needed to talk through what had happened without performing composure. She listened for a long time and then said, "You built everything you have without knowing what had been taken from you. Imagine what you are going to build now that you do know." That reframe helped more than she probably realized. The YouTube channel continued to grow. Some extended family members found it in the months after Christmas, searching my name after word spread through the family about what had come out at the dinner. A few of them sent messages. Some apologized for staying silent over the years. Some just said they had not understood what was happening inside that house. I read each message, replied briefly, and moved on. I was not interested in reopening old wounds with people who had not spoken up when it would have made a difference. But I also was not going to carry resentment toward every person who had simply been absent rather than active in what happened. By the following year, the channel had passed 500,000 subscribers. Brand partnerships brought in steady supplemental income. I moved the production setup to a proper home office space in the Columbus duplex, the first property I ever bought, the one I still live in today. People sometimes ask me why I have not moved somewhere larger. The honest answer is that this property is where everything started. Every decision I have made since that first purchase has roots in the discipline I built when I was living here and trying to make the numbers work on the smallest possible margin. I am not ready to leave that behind. I am 36 years old right now. I own 9 properties across Ohio. I have a channel that I built from my kitchen table with a phone and no script. I have a friend who told me the truth when I needed to hear it. I have a grandmother who kept a paper trail for 15 years because she trusted her instincts. And I have a life that belongs entirely to me, built from money I earned, decisions I made, and work I did when nobody was watching and nobody was helping. There are nights when I think about what I could have done with $78,000 at 18, 4 years at a university without debt, a different starting point entirely, a version of my 20s that did not involve double shifts and split meals and learning from library books because I could not afford a course. I let myself think about that sometimes because pretending it does not matter would not be honest. But I also think about this. Everything I know because I had to learn it myself. Every system I built from scratch. Every property I own, I analyzed independently and bought with eyes fully open. Nobody gave me a shortcut. And because of that, nothing I have built can be taken by anyone else's bad decision. I want to ask you something before you go. If someone in your own life spent years using the word independent to describe you when what they really meant was easy to overlook, I want to know, at what point did you stop believing that being low maintenance meant you deserved less? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that building from nothing is not the same as having nothing. Hit the like button if you believe that what people do in secret eventually comes into the light. Subscribe so you do not miss the next video, because I have more to share and I am just getting started. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you know that wherever you are in your own story, the part where things turn around is still ahead of you.